Today I'm going to talk about the income inequality, poverty and wealth. When I started, I was discussing different topics that could be relevant to test out my analyze codes and how to understand codes. What I landed on was a problem statement. How do Norway, the United States, and the Philippines differ in income inequality, poverty and welfare support? And what does this reveal about living conditions? How do welfare systems and public service shape inequality and poverty in Norway, in the United States, and the Philippines? Why are living conditions more equal in Norway than in the United States and the Philippines? Meaning that is what we are going to look at. That is what I made a program about. That's how we are going to what we are going to look at. What sources did we use? Where did I get the sources to build a database? I used the SSB from Norway, the statistics in Norway, the US Census Bureau, and the Philippine Statistic Authority. And there is also an article on Batas.co where they're talking about the Philippine poverty statistics, and in an SSB they also have an article on public 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 office, public tasks, public services that can help reduce poverty. And we know that in the US they just had last year an act that is called Reconciliation Act, and that is what we're going to base on when we're going to talk about the welfare. So what is the method? The method is quite easily or difficult depending on how we look at it. We needed an Excel files, or that we then turn into CSV files, and those files to make them into what we can call working data. We put them into something called SQLite. We could have used other databases, but working with Python and within the Python environment, it is easier to use SQLite, and that means that we turn the CSV files into SQLite, and when they then were into the database, we could clean them up and analyze that with pandas. And then we can look at trends, comparison, and we could prepare this presentation. And we can also look at equivalence scales and public services, where we can also review all that. When we are going to review them, we are going to also look at articles that was not transferred into the database or into the data. If you look at Norway and the trends the last couple of years, or from 2001 until now, we can see that if you just look at the endpoints, we can see that there is an increase from 2001 and to now. But the interesting thing is that there is huge spikes in 2005 and 2021. 2005 was just before election. There were always also some changes within that after that elections. There was a different government, or taking part of the execution branch of the government. It was the red and green. It means Labour and a couple of others political parties that won the election, and they altered the course. That is one way of understanding it, but at the same time, as we are going to discuss also later, is that they mostly agree on how the welfare system in Norway is going to work. There is some altercation, let's say, that they want it more effective, but if you then look at just the Gini coefficient, it seems these huge spikes. But if you look at 90-10, then P90-10, and there is another picture we can see. So the richest 10% has almost always earned around 3 times as much as the lowest income. So that has stayed the same, and that is also quite interesting that uh, still we see these huge spikes and we see all the difference, but the difference between the richest and the poorest has almost stayed the same, you can say. Uh, and just to get back to the 2021, there was a and the COVID just before in 2020, we know that there was a huge inflation sparks all around the world. So there was a lot of things happening in 2021, and it's quite interesting that you can see it also in the spike in the Gini coefficient. That was Norway. How is that compared to the other countries? If you then turn to 2024, 2025, we can see that Norway is doing better than the United States. But Philippines is also doing better than the United States. Again, we do not know about everything that is hidden behind the numbers, because how is it when it comes to the richest 10%? We know that in Norway it's around 3, in the US it's around 12, but we don't have the same for the Philippines, and we don't have that. We in this database we didn't cover how many is accounted as poor in the different countries. So there is still lacks in numbers, and we need to go deeper and find in. But the interesting thing is that when we are comparing Norway, US, and Philippines, we are also talking about two developed countries. They have huge modern countries that should have been more developed and also therefore maybe more equal than the third country, that is the Philippines. So Norway and US should be more stereotypically be more developed, more equal. But when we look at the numbers, we can see that that is not the case for the US. So it's really interesting to look at it from the point of stereotypes and see that the stereotypes are not working here. Just the Gini comparison shows that the Philippines is doing something the US is not doing, and we are going to look at that soon. And when I say soon, I mean now. It has to do with the public service welfare models, how they're trying to solve the problems they have. We know that in Norway we have a universal welfare state. It has a strong healthcare, education, pensions, and social support. State protects people throughout their lives. So, meaning if you are falling on hard times, you can get help. We have also this understanding all through the different political parties that we need to have a strong welfare state, meaning that when let's say that as it went in 2021, when the electricity bill went up, every political party then sat down, discussed, and found a solution, meaning that you got electricity support so that your electricity bill went down. That is one way that Norway is fighting this inequality, because if you then can use that money that you used on electricity to get food or other necessities, then you have freed up money there. The problem is, of course, inflation and other things that also were at the same time. But we can see that Norway tried to do that. And if you then look at the US, they have a more mixed system. They have and they have government and government funded support, but it's not the same as Norway. They have not the same access. It's more mixed on. It's more a blend of private and public, and there's a high degree of public or private, meaning that you need to pay. So if you get to the hospital, you need either to have insurance, or you need to have money to pay for yourself. If you don't have that, then you are going to have a problem. And with the new bill that we talked about earlier, the reconciliation bill, they also then wanted to make that more effective. You got some tax and tax return, meaning that you get less tax, but at the same time you get also more effective systems. So it's not the meaning that they cut in Medicaid and also other parts of the welfare. And what is going to happen in 1 year, 2 years, and how that is going to affect is going to also to be interesting to watch. In the Philippines, they went the other way. They saw that we have a huge problem when it comes to poverty. So what can we do? All right, one way we can do is that we have to get people educated. We need people to be healthy. So then they said to the parents, keep your kid at school, get them checked up, and we are going to give you money. And this is part of the different types of programs they have, the 4Ps. They have also healthcare for the elderly, but it's not a universal welfare state, so it's more targeted. But it's interesting to look at it when we are looking at the whole thing, and we are looking at the Gini coefficient, and we are looking at what they're trying to do. So we can see that when Norway has tried to be as efficient as the US in some ways, and also switched more to private funding, we can see that the spikes have gone up. But when we have continued on the path, yes, risen, but not as much. And we can see the same in the US, but in a more extreme way, because they don't have the same understanding or the same will to make a universal welfare state. And the Philippines is trying to battle it, and it's quite interesting to see that they are then fighting and right now have a higher equality than the US. Different scales gives us different understandings and gives us different things that we can look at. And it can also give us different answers. Here's an example that we are using different scales, and we are seeing different results. So the whole point of doing an analysis is that we have to choose a method, and that method can skew our results, meaning that if you want, you can get an analysis. Let's say that with what we talked about when it comes to the taxes, you get a tax relief, meaning that you keep more of your money, meaning that you can use that money for your benefits. And we haven't looked at that. We haven't used that. We have used the Norway public service. We have used different other scales like the Gini coefficient, and we have also looked at other scales. But different scales can give us different answers. This is not a complete answer. This is never going to be a complete understanding. We have to look at many other countries. I've also it would be interesting to look at. Now we have looked at one European country, we have looked at one American country, we have looked at one in Asia. What about Africa? What about Southern America? And so on. So one scale can give one answer, another scale can give another second answer, and different countries can also have an impact, regions and so on. So what did we find out? We found out that Norway has a relative low inequality. Sadly, the trend is rising. The US has a higher inequality than Norway. We know that the Philippines has a strong poverty problem, but they're trying to do with it. If you just look at one scale, and that is why the method choices matter, you can see that the Philippines has a stronger or less inequality than the US, but higher than Norway. So again, we found out that method matters, and method choices matters. So what are we going to do now? Right now, we have then taken my analysis and looked at what that was, and then looked at what can we do with it. We have then made it into a Streamlit app, and on that Streamlit app, you can see it's a lot of the ways you see the dashboard here, but we also added that you can add in your own surveys or your own CSV files so that you can compare it with other countries. To conclude, we can see that this project shows that inequality and poverty are shaped by both income and public systems. The one can and exist without the other. You can have a public system and have poverty, but a public system can also be a way of fighting poverty and inequality. So that is what we have found out. There's a lot more to do with it. There's a lot more data that can be collected to get to know more. And we can also look at food inflation. We can look at other things that a government cannot do anything about. We have just in this one looked at what a government can do, and through public systems, healthcare, education, and that sort of things.